It's unlikely this video is going to get monetized. The information contained hereafter is difficult to listen to. But it is videos like this, it's topics like this that start conversations that I think we as individuals and we as a society need to have. If you think videos like this are important and you want to help me to keep making them, then please consider becoming a patron. When I hit 15 patrons, I'll be starting a podcast available exclusively to patrons where I'm going to be talking about cults, and I'll be sharing my point of view, my personal point of view, a little bit more than I do on this channel as is. Also, I'm going to be talking about some things that I can't necessarily talk about on this channel without running the risk of getting instantly demonetized. There's a link to my Patreon in the description below and also in the live chat. If you want to get access to the podcast as and when it happens, then make sure you've joined at the $5 tier. Anyway, now that that's said, let's get on with the video. Mystical manipulation. The use of claims of a mystical nature to gain influence over an individual or a group. It is one of the principal entries in the cult leader playbook. It is one of the most deceitful building blocks of a cult, and it is one of the main ways that cults get you. Mystical manipulation, or as I'll call it in this video for brevity's sake, MM, typically comes part and parcel with what Robert J. Lifton called planned spontaneity. For clarity, planned spontaneity looks like the following, and by no means is the example I'm about to give the only example of planned spontaneity and how it works. The classic example is a leader sending their most loyal devotees out into a crowd of prospective members or rank and file members and getting them to feel the group out and gather information on that group that will then be used later under the ruse of the leader having gained that information through some mystical means or through their own personal insight or through some skills or ability or something that they claim to have. Some groups make heavy use of confirmation bias and fear indoctrination in conjunction with this. That was how I understood MM until recently. Upon rereading Robert J. Lifton's explanation of it in his book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, I saw that there's a different side to it. To help me explain the realities of mystical manipulation in greater detail, I've invited 3 guests. All 3 of these guests have channels here on YouTube, and all 3 of them are former cult members. Former cult members of 3 different cults. The guests joining me today are Chris Shelton, a former Scientologist and Sea Org member, turned writer, podcaster, YouTuber, and advocate for critical thinking. Sarah Landry, who spent years under undue influence following a man who calls himself Nithyananda. Once known as the face of the organisation, she's now a whistleblower alerting the public to his fraudulence and criminality. And last but not least, Excultbaby, a former Jehovah's Witness, now a YouTuber speaking out against the harm the organisation is doing and criticising their beliefs. Excultbaby was a bit ill when we recorded their section, so please bear with and give them lots of support in the comments for doing this with me despite how they were feeling. With the help of the knowledge and experience of my guests, I'm going to map out how MM applies to cults, and what I think you'll notice here is how there are similarities between each of these groups, and there are similarities between the groups that you hear about today and other groups that you may be familiar with. What you'll hear from my guests today are by no means the only forms that MM takes. Each group has their own brand, their own specific version of mystical manipulation, and that version of mystical manipulation, when used in that group, is an integral part of gaining undue influence over unwitting people and turning the average person into the average cult member. As I understand it, a primary aspect of MM is a lofty claim made in the pursuit of both power and a special kind of mystique, as Lifton calls it. This might be the claim that they were chosen in some way or that they have some higher purpose. It might include the belief that they have seen something that others haven't, be it a truth or a law or something that everyone needs that only they can provide, only they can bring about. It may be the case that they teach a certain thing, that they have a certain way that they will say, if established, this thing will bring about X, Y, Z, whatever. The key here though is that they are pretty much the only one who has access to this knowledge from its source, or they are the only one who has been able to perceive this, or their way is the only way this is going to happen, or they're the only one that can make this thing happen with their way. You know, there's a real exclusivity here, and I believe that the claim of having some kind of supernatural ability also plays into this too.
It's an interesting question regarding how the cult leader who calls himself Nityananda was chosen.
L. Ron Hubbard wasn't particularly selected or chosen by a higher authority or power. He never claimed anything like that. He always said he was just a man.
Back when I was his devoted follower, I believed that he had been recognized at the age of 3 years old as a living incarnation, because that's what we were told by his cult.
We always regarded him as someone who had some kind of innate genius or special wisdom or knowledge that he could not only peer into the souls of other people, but could figure things out in a way that we couldn't.
The governing body, who are, the Jehovah's Witness leaders, they are all members of the anointed class, or the 144,000 who they believe are going to go to heaven.
In retrospect, after doing some independent research, I think that his whole story of how he was chosen was actually just sort of a self mythology. Like he mythologized his own childhood.
And they're basically just special anointed people who are God's channel basically for spiritual food at the right time.
Depending on who you believe, he claims that a yoga teacher named Raghupati Yogi had found him at 3 years old and basically stated that he was born to be the world guru, or like the teacher of the entire planet. According to him, his yoga training started at that young age. And he also had a Vedanta teacher, like a Hindu philosophy teacher, who trained him in the scriptures. And he also claims that at 9 years old, he met a living avatar in form in the Tiruvannamalai temple, who was called Arunagiri Yogeshwara. And so he claims it was this Arunagiri Yogeshwara, an incarnation of Shiva from something like 10,000 years ago, who came back at this point in time to prepare him for his mission.
And so we thought he had this strain of genius to him, and this, and also a beneficence. He claimed that all his life, going back to a very young age, he had the desire to help others and help mankind.
So it's basically this little council of guys. They all believe that they have some sort of special direct communication channel with God. And even though they have this channel, for some reason, they still vote on things. And they aren't all unanimous votes, which doesn't make sense. Like, that in and of itself should debunk the idea that they have some sort of special channel to God, because if they all have the special connection, they should all agree on everything. But
the spiritual calling that he's answered is something really dubious at this point. It's sad because a lot of brainwashed people still believe that he is the avatar of our time, like the living embodiment of Lord Shiva. But in reality, he's just kind of a liar. I don't know whether he is a con artist who meant to lie about all of this from the beginning, or if he's mentally ill and he believes it himself. Either way, one thing is clear: he's a fraud.
They make the claim that the life of a Jehovah's Witness is, quote, the best life ever. So they kind of purport to, not even besides the salvation, basically provide the best possible lifestyle a human being can have, provide true happiness, specifically by following the guidelines of how they live their lives and how they're supposed to live their lives. Like,
when he first started his mission, he claimed that he is the guru for enlightenment, and that it's his life mission to initiate humanity into what he called living enlightenment. And the way he described this as something unique is that he claimed that in the past gurus initiated disciples into something called Videha Mukti, which means liberation or enlightenment at the moment of death.
L. Ron Hubbard claimed that he had discovered certain principal truths about life and its relationship with the universe and with other forms of life, and that this special insight and knowledge that he had discovered gave him a philosophical the credentials to speak on all things having to do with life.
And he specifically quoted Buddhist teachers and other forms of Eastern religions that would lead people to kind of a deathbed enlightenment. But he claimed that he was bringing the world something called Jivan Mukti, which is enlightenment even while alive, or living enlightenment.
All of their rules about morality and about the way you're supposed to dress, the way you're supposed to talk, the things you are and aren't allowed to do, the way that you approach dating and marriage, all of that to them is the best way of living. And some of it is good things. Like, they don't want people getting drunk. That you can get disfellowshipped for smoking at all. Doing drugs, things like that. So those are positive things, but they take those restrictions pretty far. And in a lot of cases, they restrict things that are normal and sometimes, necessary for just normal social interaction.
Hubbard claimed that Scientology, the word that he coined for his philosophy and the subject, was the one thing, he said, Scientology was the one thing that was senior to all of life itself, because it explained life.
Back in 2009, when I first got sucked into his cult, I found that a really attractive notion, like to be alive and enlightened and to bring the best realization to others, basically to help humanity. But his mission really took a major turn when he became obsessed with superpowers.
They do take those things pretty far, but they kind of think of themselves as the best of humanity, essentially. And they want to spread that socially to other people. They make a big deal about how when people look at them, they see that they're different. And how when people interact with them, they can see how they're different in the way that they act and the way that they speak. And, oh, they're so well-mannered and well-dressed. And they're so kind and well-spoken and all of that stuff.
He gave himself a pretty broad brush to paint with, and then claimed that through his techniques and methods, a person could gain personal insight and wisdom, but could also gain personal spiritual immortality. And that by doing this, you regain your natural goodness and, sort of ethics. And therefore, by everybody doing these processes and procedures, we would have this cleared society, or what he called a cleared planet, cleared of all the junk and the stress and the trauma you see. And therefore, you would have world peace, an end to criminality, and an end to all of war and insanity, mental health problems as well. So that was the big, high goal of Scientology.
The purpose of the leader being what it is, it's proclaimed first by the leader and then by their followers that anybody who criticizes them is motivated by a lower impulse. They may also explain it away, saying that the critic is lacking something necessary or integral for recognizing the truth or importance of their message. They may say that the critic is simple-minded or lacks awareness or necessary knowledge. They may say that they're insufficiently pure or enlightened, or they may say that they have a personal vendetta against the leader or the group, or that they hate them, or that they're jealous of them, or that they're angry with them, or something, or all of the above and more. That list gets long quickly.
When someone criticizes the truth, basically they make it out to seem like that person they have a lot of different things that they will call that person. Obviously, apostate will be the first thing that they say, but one term that they use pretty often is like a fault finder. Someone who is just nitpicking and looking for problems and is never satisfied. So that's how they'll characterize critics. Another way that they'll characterize critics is someone who is selfish and wants to make everything about them. Someone who wants to basically take people out of the Jehovah's Witnesses and make a new religion for themselves, essentially. Get followers for themselves. Get attention for themselves.
So in the cult of Nityananda, anytime somebody questions the guru or questions his instruction or blows the whistle the way I have by flat out calling it a cult and pointing out all of his illegal criminal activity, he tells his followers that that individual got lost on their way towards enlightenment and blames him for their failure.
If anybody steps out of line in Scientology or starts questioning management or L. Ron Hubbard or David Miscavige directly, the leaders of Scientology, then they are quickly wrangled in, sort of brought into line through Scientology's ethics and justice system.
And at the most basic, there's just people who leave the religion because kind of more like my own reasons for leaving when I was disfellowshipped was just in my own mind. I was like, I can't cut it as a witness. I can't be a good witness. I can't live this lifestyle. I'm not strong enough. It made me feel weak. It made me feel inferior. It made me feel like I could never be good enough. And I knew that they always preached, that God can do anything. He can make anybody good enough. And if you think that you're not good enough, then you're doubting God's power, essentially. But even after they say that, you still feel like, well, I'm not saying that I'm the exception that God can't fix, but I'm saying that I've freaking tried and I can't do it.
So what goes on in the real world is that we wake up, we realize we've been duped. We see that everything he's promised us is just a carrot that he dangles to make us recruit more members into his cult or earn more money for him while he abuses us. But what he tells people is that we got jealous of his enlightenment and that we are anti-Hindu, that we're trying to hurt Hinduism by bringing him down.
If they keep questioning and go to the point where the ethics people have enacted disconnection, where they are literally shunned from the group and disconnected from everybody, then the group is told that that person is a suppressive person. This is a special label in Scientology for somebody who is a psychotic or a known criminal.
But they make you kind of feel like the reason you can't do it is because you're not putting in the effort, and not that what they're asking of you is unreasonable. They always frame it as the problem being with you as opposed to the problem being with their own rules. So basically, anybody who leaves the religion or anybody who criticizes the religion can be put into all these boxes of, somebody who just couldn't cut it as a witness and now they're miffed about that, or somebody who is just a nitpicker and a fault finder, or somebody who for some reason is just doing it for attention. And none of that really even makes sense, of course, but that's kind of what they claim essentially for people who leave.
Hubbard makes comparisons to Hitler and Dillinger and famous criminals in the past and says those were examples of suppressive people. And so they're equating you, the person who spoke out, to these infamous, horrible figures.
So he justifies the fact that there are dissenters through a really kind of clever spiritual form of doublespeak. He'll never address the actual points that we make against him. For example, when I went to the public about the fact that he forced all of his kids in the Gurukul school to beat each other, he never actually answered to that and said, no, the kids weren't made to beat each other. Instead, what he said was Sarah Landry was an implant from the Vatican sent to destroy Hinduism all along. All the lies that she's saying now are hate speech. If you listen to her, it's a crime against the guru. It's guru droha. And in fact, he's also said that I'm a demon leading people to hell, which is kind of ironic because in Hinduism, there's no such thing as hell. And he's using very Christian terminology to try to scare people away from listening to those who are criticizing or questioning him.
If you speak out in Scientology, or if you are somebody who is critical of Scientology, the stated reasons, according to L. Ron Hubbard, are that you have committed some kind of sin or wrongdoing, or a series of such wrongdoings against the organization, against Scientology itself, or Scientologists, and in particular against those individuals whom you are now criticizing or fault finding or complaining about. And this is universal throughout all of Scientology, at all levels of Scientology, from the lowest public levels all the way up to the highest levels of the Sea Organization. Everybody follows this principle. Hubbard laid it out in detail and said that this is the only reason why somebody would ever be critical of Scientology. And of course, underlying this with a suppressive person or a real antisocial person are evil intentions towards Scientology, because they want mankind to be pushed further into the mud, is how Hubbard would describe it. Is you're pushing man into the mud. You're making him worse off, and that's what suppressive people want to do, and that's what Scientology is the cure for. So clearly, it shouldn't be criticized.
In a lot of cases, dedication to the cause crosses lines best left uncrossed. Leaders may berate and abuse their followers to this end. Some plunge deep into the psychological depths of the members and pull out painful memories under the guise of healing. Others have their followers work their fingers to the bone, and some groups encourage their followers to lie or break the law in the name of the leader. They believe that it's all for the greater good, but in reality they are being exploited by the leader for the leader's own purposes.
Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to go to several meetings a week and be prepared for those meetings. So not only are they taking, a couple hours out of their day a few times a week to go to these meetings, but they're expected to spend time studying publications in preparation for those meetings on the topics that will be discussed. They're also expected to spend quite a bit of time in the ministry.
In Scientology, a cleared planet is achieved through the practice of Scientology auditing or counseling, because the mystical aspect of Scientology is that you exist as a spiritual entity and that you carry around the stress and trauma of your existence, kind of similar to Marley in A Christmas Carol. That old Dickens story where you're carrying around the chains of your experiences, and it's only through Scientology auditing that you're able to get rid of those chains and stop carrying them around with you. And if everybody were to do this, then the collected, accumulated chains of stress and trauma and wrongdoing and atrocities and everything in our past would all be gone, and we could move forward into the future in a cleared of all of those past horrors and atrocities, you see. And this is how we would create this ideal state for man and in an ideal society for everybody.
They're not really encouraged to get a career. They're basically encouraged as often as possible to get a part-time job that they can support themselves with while pioneering, or learn a trade that will be useful to Watchtower on building projects. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're a good Jehovah's Witness, then you will basically plan your life around dedicating as much of your time and resources as possible to Watchtower and its goals and purposes.
There is no such thing as decency or human welfare in the Nityananda cult. The biggest irony here is that the mystical purpose driving this fraud's mission, or what he claims is driving the mission for all of his disciples, is to bring people from human into superhuman. And yet, in the cause of that, they lose their humanity. He told me specifically once that niceness or being friendly or being kind is not a spiritual quality. I remember actually the very first time I started to question the fact that people are victims of him in his own organization. The first time I saw him yelling at people and growling at people and his inner circle disciples bullying others, I started to recoil. And he looked at me and he actually yelled at me. My name at that time was Swarupa Priya. And he said, "Swarupa Priya, your dirty Canadian niceness is holding you back." And he went on a rant about how being raised in the polite country of Canada, Canada is renowned around the world for being very polite. Politeness is kind of notorious in his cult as being a diversion from the goal. And he was really pissed off at me that when he would give me the instruction to yell at people, or to scold people or to swear at people, I had trouble doing it.
Even when you're a healthy Jehovah's Witness, putting your life on hold for Watchtower, that's not to mention the fact that they want you to put the organization first to the point that you would die in case of needing a blood transfusion as a witness, because the higher purpose is more important than your own life. And in cases like shunning, your own family, your own friends are not as important as the higher purpose of the organization. You put that on hold if someone gets disfellowshipped, like me, for example. Like, I know that my family would love to see me and talk to me for the most part, especially my mom, but they feel as though they can't, because to them it's a matter of loyalty to God and to the organization over their loyalty to me. The organization has to come before everything else in their lives, including their family and friends and their own lives.
Because this goal is so high and so broad and so inclusive of literally every single human being on planet Earth, anybody who would want to get in the way of this or stop it or slow it down or in any way hinder the progress of Scientology is clearly somebody who is either A, wholly ignorant of everything it's about and has been fed false or bad information about it, or is a raging psychotic who just wants to see mankind, shoved down into the mud.
During the internal meetings, if somebody had a question, not even questioning the guru or questioning the cult, but a question like, well, what time are we supposed to do this? Others were expected to be ferocious and yell at that person and shame that person and ridicule that person for not knowing already. There was no tolerance for ignorance. Even if somebody hadn't yet been given the answer that they needed, it was expected that they should just know it or figure it out.
Child sex abuse is another example of that, because their organization's reputation ends up mattering more to them, and being, obedient to the direction of the organization becomes more important than criminal justice, than making sure children in the congregation are safe from child predators. If Watchtower tells an elder, okay, here's what you need to do, and none of what they tell the elder to do involves reporting to police, then they won't report to police. That just doesn't happen. It's not that it happens in every case, but if they tell them not to, they won't, and they won't even question it.
Somebody who Nityananda raped, a man, was ready to go public and file a case against Nityananda for raping him. And just before he was able to file his complaint, one of the young girls, the daughter of the people who ran Nityananda's Seattle Center, filed a fake rape charge against that victim.
If a Scientologist confronts somebody who is anti-Scientology and determines that it's not just ignorance and they do know what Scientology is about, then clearly the only reason you would go against it is that you are psychotic. And this unfortunately includes anybody of any age, any class, any group of any kind. So this is how Scientologists can rationalize disconnecting from or shunning family members, spouses, even their own kids, because the mission of clearing the planet and bringing peace to our entire society is clearly more important than the needs of any one or two individuals. And that's the thinking process that goes on there.
Anybody who points out his hypocrisies or his crimes, he has no problem literally ruining their lives. He makes his own disciples go fight false cases. And so, as per Hinduism, one of the noblest qualities is satya, speaking the truth. But he has convinced all of his people that it's justifiable to lie in order to defend their guru. And luckily, it looks like this cycle is coming to an end, because they've overused that tactic to put false cases on people so much that, thank goodness, now the Indian judiciary, they're throwing it out whenever a Nityananda disciple puts a fake rape case, because they've done it so much.
Everything surrounding the organization and surrounding their religion comes before anything else in their life. Anything else that, a regular person that wasn't in a cult would hold to supreme importance, like the safety of children in their own lives and their families.
Followers are expected to accept the claims of the leader, usually on faith alone. Typically because the nature of the claim is such that no proof can be given. What this often means is that once the follower accepts that what the leader is saying is true, they are stepping inside an alternative reality specific to the cult. All experiences pretty much thereafter are interpreted based on that cult's specific map of reality.
Within my time in Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard was always a sort of a mythic figure of importance, a genius or super genius who had solved all of these problems and had been beneficent enough to give us the answers and to dedicate his entire life to that cause. Despite all the, as he said, the slings and arrows of the enemy going against him, he had done all of this great work. And so it was our job to transmit this work to others, to propagate or disseminate it, and to use it on ourselves as best we could, as standardly as we could. In other words, exactly according to his directions, and spending a lot of time learning what his directions were and clarifying them for ourselves, so we were really super clear about what it was he wanted us to do, and then go forward and try to accomplish those purposes.
As a Jehovah's Witness, most of the time I was happy. Looking back, I think a lot of that was kind of prescribed happiness because the organization encourages us to be a happy people. They kind of were like, we're God's people, we're a happy people, we have a happy God, so let's, get the happiness on.
When I actually became a member of his monastic order, I actually discovered the hypocrisy that goes on behind the scenes. And by then I was already so brainwashed that any horrible act he committed, I was able to kind of normalize in my inner space by deciding he's Shiva, I'm only a human. So if he says this, then it must be true on another level or on a higher level. And we were constantly told, if you don't like something that he's doing, it's because you can only see this dimension that you're occupying, but he's alive in all 11 dimensions, and what he's doing it from a higher perspective or a higher understanding.
So my idea or understanding of Hubbard was always one of this beneficent philosopher sort of guy who was also a regular Joe, had a temper and would flare up from time to time, and he had his ups and downs just like anybody else did. So he wasn't a divine figure. He was just this, very ultimate sort of genius figure.
Later on in life, when I discovered that, I had attraction to the same sex, that made it even more difficult because, again, feeling constantly like a failure, feeling constantly like I'm not doing things right. I must just be like obsessed with sex, and I'm just obsessed with all of this sinful stuff and what's wrong with me. And looking back now, those were very normal feelings that I was feeling. There was nothing that was excessive or perverted about it, but it made me feel that way because of the very high and very counter to nature expectations that Jehovah's Witnesses have set out for them.
On stage, he tells people celibacy is the only way to realize enlightenment, and celibacy is the only lifestyle for seekers. And yet behind the scenes, he's having sex with men, women, and children. And he's requesting nude photos from his disciples to be sent to his Facebook Messenger inbox. And he's expecting sexual favors from many of us.
I always thought of Scientology as the hidden jewel in our society or on Earth. This somehow we had been blessed by having L. Ron Hubbard come along and discover all of this for us, and we had the only what we called technology, the methodology or the guidelines and principles and practices of Scientology collectively is called its technology. And we always thought how lucky we are to have this technology and how amazing it is that we have been born in this time and place and lucky enough to have found it and to get it out to everybody else.
I remember there was one incident in particular. I was in his bedroom, backstage in the green room of the main program hall during one of his December programs. And he called me to his bed. He was hugging me, and he started groping my chest, and he kissed me. And I must have had a look on my face like, this doesn't compute, or it doesn't match what he claims to be. And he kind of held my face between his two hands and said, "Dear, our romance is not physical." And right that moment, imagine somebody's physically touching you and telling you that your romance with them is not physical. It throws you into a huge confusion about what is reality. And so I started to think, just like anybody else would if they're brainwashed by a man like him, I started to think, what is he teaching me by this? Why has he created this situation? Is he trying to break my misconceptions about romance or about lust? And meanwhile, he had also told me that I was an incarnation of the goddess Parvati. And at that time, I didn't know. This is something he told many, many, many women, all the girls he wanted to victimize. He kind of told us that we're incarnations to justify his sexual advances. So I was going through a major identity conflict. Am I a renunciant living as a Hindu nun? Or am I an incarnation of his goddess? Am I a Canadian girl? Am I Swarupa Priya? Is this physical? Is this not physical? So basically, he plants so much confusion and so much anxiety about what reality is that he can get away with doing anything behind the scenes. And instead of questioning him, his brainwashed followers will question their perception.
I basically had nothing but respect for the organization and for all the leaders in charge. I never questioned it. I never had any reason to growing up, even though looking back, I realized that a lot of the stuff that I was taught was wrong. I also didn't know a lot of the history at the time. So I had nothing but respect for the Jehovah's Witness leadership. I didn't question it. I wasn't resentful towards them at all.
And I think that's the ultimate key to his masterful manipulation of people. Instead of setting himself up in a position where his hypocrisy is brought into account, he sets him up in a position where his hypocrisy makes other people feel like he's creating a drama or a leela in order for them to awaken. And so when he flees India to hide from a rape case, instead of people saying, well, he's absconded and he's hiding out in Ecuador, they'll say he's creating a leela for us to learn from this. What's the lesson here?
The idea of criticizing them or even joking about them, like during Jehovah's JW broadcasting episodes, my family would all sit down and watch them. And if you've ever seen one where the governing body member, Stephen Lett, is the one that's, presenting, he pulls some really goofy faces and he talks in such a weird way. But, afterwards we would just talk about him like, oh, Stephen Lett, he's great. He's so friendly. He's so nice. He seems to have a special interest in children, that guy. But realistically, looking at it, he wasn't a good speaker. But instead of thinking about him critically or saying anything critical about him, we would talk about him in a way that was like, oh, he's a little odd, but we just love that guy. We couldn't, even the things that we thought were odd about members of the governing body, we would talk about it in a way that was not critical.
Luckily now, I think, thanks to exposés like this one that you're doing and that some of the news channels in India have done and, other documentaries about cults, a lot of people are starting to wake up and realize what his manipulation is. And as more and more people wake up, I think they'll stop questioning themselves and saying, well, how am I missing his point? And instead they'll start questioning him and saying, wait a minute, how did he get me to believe this is okay? And I think that's the ultimate goal for us here, is to shift the introspective questioning from how am I failing this master into questioning him and saying, wait, is he really qualified to be a master?
To make sense of their pain and their struggle, cult members will find ways to rationalize their difficulties. Some end up taking pleasure in the pain. Others withdraw from the leader and may even begin to resent the leader, all while still believing, thanks to undue influence and indoctrination, that that leader has the one true path to salvation, to paradise, to enlightenment, to true freedom or happiness. That said, in the pursuit, freedom and happiness are typically the first things to go, despite appearances. Nonetheless, many cult members find themselves unable to shake the belief that their leader has the truth. Despite the many hardships, indoctrination is likely to keep them steadfast. It's likely to keep them believing that one day, in some way, their leader is going to come through on the promises that they have made, or even make them believe that they are coming through on those promises in that moment, despite there really being no proof that that is the case.
At my most devout was actually when I was struggling the hardest to be the good witness that I was supposed to be. And I kept scriptures in my head, like the one about, Jesus said something about, tearing out your eye and cutting off your hand if they're causing you to sin, basically. And that was really what I felt like I was doing. But knowing that that was in scripture made me feel like it was right. The fact that it hurt, the fact that it was difficult, just affirmed for me that it was the right way.
When the fraud who called himself Nityananda bullied me and called me names and swore at me and yelled at me and punished me and told me that I was a failure and told me I was, worthless, instead of making me double down on my devotion and try harder, I started to withdraw. And I think there's probably different personality types, and different people will respond differently to different kinds of training. But I grew up in a household where I was very rarely yelled at. My mom certainly never swore at me and never called me a failure. In fact, my mother was a teacher, and my grandfather was a superintendent of the school district. I come from an education family. And so I grew up from a young age being told positive reinforcement will garner better results than negative reinforcement. And that if somebody yells at a child or blames a child for their failure, or dumps on somebody for not achieving a goal, then that person doesn't understand the basics of human psychology. So whenever I saw this, this fraud masquerading as a guru, whenever he hurt me, I would kind of start questioning him, thinking, how qualified is he really if he thinks that he's going to get better results by yelling at people and by blaming them for their failures? Doesn't he know that positive reinforcement will garner better results?
As a Scientologist, and especially as a Sea Org member, when I was pushed quite hard in the direction of physical punishments for, disciplinary actions, or just the regular schedule of the Sea Org, we were up all the time. We were getting 5 to 6 hours of sleep a night as a routine action. And working all day, every day. And this went on for years and years. And then there was physical labor and many, many other things. So through the course of all of that, I certainly had my ups and downs and doubts and uncertainties about what I was doing.
He would also do a lot of gaslighting. The moment he felt like I was slipping away from him, he would start love bombing me to bring me back. And, there was one incident at the end of a Kumbh Mela, which is like the greatest Hindu festival on the planet. We had a Kumbh Mela in Ujjain. And for that, we had departments among the people who were his ashramites or his disciples. And I was in the temple department, and it was a 24-hour shift. So for more than 1 month straight, 24 hours a day, every single day, I stayed in the temple, greeting people as they entered to have darshan or to see the deities. And my responsibility was to be basically the welcoming face to that temple. So I had to take selfies with people and take them on tours and clean the temple when it closed at about 3 a.m. and prepare it to open again at about 5 a.m. So less than 2 hours of sleep. We weren't given beds, so we had to sleep on the dirt floor. I wasn't allowed to leave to eat or to get water, and I fell really sick during that program.
And then at some point, I kind of realized that I didn't have the stomach to sit and watch myself chop off my own arm. So I just kind of said, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. And it made me feel like I was weak and pathetic. But even then, I still thought of myself as devout because I believed very strongly that I was wrong, that I was making the wrong decision, that I was giving in to the temptations of the devil and all of that.
For 4 days straight, I couldn't get up. I was lying on the floor, and there was no medical attention given or anything like that. And towards the end of this Kumbh Mela, I got a message from my mother that my grandfather had had a stroke and that it was likely he would pass away.
But really the thing that kept me going was the purpose of it, was the idea that, well, Hubbard had to endure a lot worse than I ever had to.
But I very firmly believed that my struggle was a righteous struggle, and that even though I was miserable, that it was right for me to be miserable, because eventually I wouldn't want it anymore, and eventually it would pass and it would be over, and then someday in paradise I would forget all about it because of my struggle. I would earn that salvation.
He had taken on the burden of resolving the problems of man as a spiritual entity, resolving the conflicts of war and criminality, and had solved illiteracy and drug problems. I mean, all of these problems are solved, supposedly, within the world of Scientology. And I believed it. And I believed it 100%. And that kind of belief was necessary for me to endure all the physical punishments and nonsense that I had to go through. And many, many times during the course of this, I thought of myself as a bit of a martyr.
That's when I went into the greatest questioning of my lifestyle choice, because growing up, I had been really close with my grandfather. And so I started to beat myself up over that. Like, shit, I missed out on spending the last months of my grandfather's life with my family in order to be in this place where I get yelled at and bullied and sleep deprived and malnourished, and where I get sick and where I sleep on a dirt floor, and where, you know, when I need to go to the hospital, nobody gives me approval to go, and where the man who I'm devoted to treats me like shit.
I didn't relish being a martyr. I didn't relish the pain of it. I didn't think that that was always fun or enjoyable. Yet at the same time, I felt it was necessary. I felt whatever I was enduring was necessary for the greater good, for the bigger cause, for the big game. And I wanted to win that big game. I wanted to be a part of the solution. I didn't want to be part of the problem.
I didn't resent the organization. I didn't resent the people. I didn't resent those rules. I just felt like my struggle was proof that it was right.
In this way, the mind of a cult member is overcome. Minds are absorbed by the fictions of an alternative reality. Experiences are filtered through a cult leader's ideas of what things mean and how life works. Mystical manipulation is the use of actual events and human emotions. And on the part of the unsafe leader and the cult, the claim of higher knowledge or higher purpose, along with deceit and betrayal. It assaults your view of reality. It elevates the leader above you and all of humanity. It elevates the group's cause above anything pursued by anybody else, literally anybody else. It's a huge part of thought reform, and it is instrumental in making you believe. I want to say a massive thank you to my patrons. Their support goes such a long way to helping me make videos like this and helping to support the channel. If you're the kind of person who wants to help support a channel like this, then please consider becoming a patron. And if you do, you'll actually be speeding along the podcast that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. When I hit 15 patrons, as I said, I'm going to be starting a podcast which is going to be available exclusively to patrons at the $5 supporter tier. If you'd like to support the channel by becoming a patron, then you can do that by clicking the link in the description below or in the live chat. That will take you to my Patreon. As I say, if you want to get access to the podcast, don't forget to become a patron at the $5 supporter level. These cats and I would like to say a massive thank you to the guests who helped make this video what it was. You really helped to drive home the reality of this issue. Thank you again for joining me. It was an absolute joy to chat with you, and although not a joy to go over the subject matter, it has to be said. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for helping with this. If you got something from this video, please hit the like button and let me know in the comments below what you thought to it. If you want to see more videos like this from me, then please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And the last thing I'll say really is thank you for watching. If you want to stick around and watch more, then I will see you in the next one.